In 1858, California had 280 stamp mills crushing gold ore day and night. 3 years later, only 40 survived. The machines that promised to democratize wealth instead concentrated it in the hands of capitalists who could afford $100,000 mills and $40,000 freight bills. The California gold rush wasn't killed by depleted streams. It was devoured by industrial machinery that turned mountains into dust at 54 tons per day. By 1850, the average lone prospector with his pan was earning less per week than it cost to feed himself. Meanwhile, stamp mills were processing ore worth thousands daily, but the men who fed those machines earned $3 a day and lost their hearing by age 30. The romantic image of the grizzled 49er panning for nuggets. That lasted about 18 months. What followed was the thunderous reality of 750-pound iron stamps dropping 90 times per minute, crushing not just rock, but the dream of independent wealth that had drawn 300,000 people west. Here's what the stamp mills actually did. They transformed the largest migration in American history into wage labor. They turned California's gold fields into factory floors. And they did it so thoroughly that by 1852, just 4 years after James Marshall found those first flakes at Sutter's Mill, hard rock mining had already surpassed placer mining in total value extracted. The machines won. This is the story of how. The sound came first. Before you saw the stamp mill, you heard it. A rhythmic thunder that carried for miles across the Sierra foothills. At the Vulture Mill in Arizona, 80 stamps hammered simultaneously. On clear days, the sound reached 15 miles. Closer in, the earth itself vibrated. Mill workers learned to read that vibration, feeling through their boots when a stamp had jammed or when the ore feed was running light. Inside the mill, the noise was a physical force. Men shouted inches from each other's ears and couldn't be heard. They communicated in gestures, reading lips, developing their own sign language. By the end of a 12-hour shift, blood seeped from their ears. By the end of a career, and few lasted more than 5 years, they were deaf. At the Standard Mill in Bodie, California, the superintendent noted in 1895 that of the 47 men who'd worked the stamp floor for more than 2 years, 43 showed significant hearing diminishment, and 28 were functionally deaf. Each stamp weighed between 500 and 750 pounds. A camshaft driven by a steam engine or water wheel lifted each stamp 18 inches, then released it. The stamp fell by gravity onto an iron die in a mortar box filled with ore and water. The impact pulverized quartz into powder. 5 stamps typically worked in a battery. Their drops staggered so the thundering never stopped. The stamps made, on average, 90 drops per minute. That's 450 impacts per minute per battery. A 20-stamp mill, considered mid-sized, delivered 1-800 crushing blows every 60 seconds, hour after hour, shift after shift. The Standard Mill at Bodie processed 54 tons of ore daily when running at full capacity. The mill operated from 1877 to 1913. During those 37 years, it extracted more than $16 million in gold and silver from ore that averaged less than half an ounce of gold per ton. The mathematics were brutal but clear. Industrial scale turned low-grade ore profitable. Individual miners with hand tools couldn't touch rock that lean. The stamp mills could eat mountains that would have starved prospectors. Water flowed constantly through the mortar boxes, 150 to 200 gallons per hour per stamp. The mixture of crushed ore and water, called pulp, passed through wire mesh screens. Only particles fine enough to pass through a 40-mesh screen, that's 1,600 holes per square inch, moved to the next stage. Everything else got stamped again. The ore had to be crushed to the consistency of fine flour. Anything coarser and the gold particles stayed locked in the quartz matrix. The pulp flowed over amalgamation tables, copper plates coated with liquid mercury. Gold has a peculiar affinity for mercury. Any gold particle touching the mercury bonded instantly, forming an amalgam. The worthless pulp washed away. The amalgam stayed behind. During cleanup, workers scraped the amalgam off the plates and squeezed it through canvas to remove excess mercury. What remained went into a retort, a heavy iron vessel heated to 674 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, mercury vaporizes. The vapor was captured and condensed back to liquid for reuse. What remained in the retort was called sponge gold, pure gold with a spongy texture from where the mercury had been. The mercury made stamp mills profitable. It also made them deadly. Every mill used hundreds of pounds of mercury. Despite efforts to recover and recycle it, mercury escaped constantly. It evaporated from the heated retorts. It washed away with the tailings. It vaporized from the amalgamation tables in the heat of a summer day. Workers absorbed it through their skin when handling the amalgam. They breathed the vapor when heating the retorts. The symptoms came slowly, tremors in the hands, then the classic Mad Hatter syndrome as the mercury accumulated in their brains. Historical records indicate that hard rock mines in California lost approximately 3 million pounds of mercury to the environment. That mercury is still there, in the sediment, in the groundwater. But the human cost came faster. Mill workers lost their teeth first. Then came the tremors, the personality changes, the inability to concentrate. Many died in their 40s from what was called quicksilver poisoning. The mill owners knew. Contemporary accounts describe precautions, better ventilation, shorter shifts for retort operators, but the work had to be done, and there were always more men willing to take the jobs at $3 per day. James Marshall found gold at Sutter's Mill on January 24, 1848. Within weeks, word spread through California. Within months, it reached the East Coast. By December 1848, President Polk confirmed the discovery in an address to Congress, showing samples of California gold. The gate opened. In 1848, California's non-native population was roughly 14,000. By the end of 1849, nearly 100,000 people had arrived. By 1852, the population reached 250,000. It was the largest peacetime migration in American history, compressed into 4 years. Those early arrivals found easy gold. Prospectors working the richest placer deposits in 1848 could collect thousands of dollars worth of gold in a single day. Even average miners during the initial rush earned 10 to 15 times what a laborer made back east. A man could work 6 months in the gold fields and return home with 6 years' wages. The promise seemed real, but the easy gold vanished fast. Placer deposits, gold that had weathered out of quartz veins and settled in stream beds, were finite. By 1850, the surface gold in the richest areas was largely gone. Production peaked in 1852 at $81 million extracted that year. Then came the decline. By 1855, placer mining yielded only $10 million annually. The party was ending, but the gold itself wasn't gone. It was still there, locked in quartz veins running through the mountains. The trick was getting it out. Quartz mining required different skills and different tools. You couldn't pan quartz. You had to tunnel into mountains, blast the ore loose with black powder, haul it to the surface, then crush it fine enough to free the gold. That meant capital, that meant machinery, that meant stamp mills. The first American stamp mill was built in 1829 at the Capps Mine in North Carolina. The technology was ancient. Stamps for crushing ore appeared in German mining texts from the 1100s, and Georgius Agricola illustrated them in detail in his 1556 treatise De Re Metallica. But California miners imported the Cornish stamp design from English tin mines and improved it. They changed from soft iron to cast iron shoes and dies. They made the stamps rotate slightly on each drop, evening out wear. They increased the drop speed. The result was the California stamp, efficient enough that it was soon exported worldwide. By 1850, California stamp mills were processing quartz ore. By 1858, there were more than 280 operating in California alone. Towns that had been placer camps transformed into mill towns. The sound of stamps replaced the sound of pickaxes and stream gravel. But building a mill required serious money. A modest 10-stamp mill cost roughly $10,000 in equipment and construction. A 40-stamp mill ran over $100,000. Getting the equipment to remote mining districts added staggering freight costs. In Idaho's Rocky Bar district in the mid-1860s, freight from the nearest steamboat landing to the mine site cost $40,000, nearly half the mill's purchase price. That kind of capital came from investors, not from prospectors. Eastern financiers, San Francisco merchants, European syndicates, they funded the mills. The miners who'd rushed west, with dreams of striking it rich, now faced a choice: sell their claims to capitalists who could afford the machinery, or try to compete with industrial processing. Most sold. Many stayed on as wage workers in the operations that now worked their former claims. The mill jobs paid $3 to $5 per day, decent wages for the 1850s, roughly triple what an Eastern factory worker earned. But it was wage labor, not the independent fortune hunting that had drawn men west. You worked the shift the boss set. You fed the stamps, cleaned the plates, handled the mercury. You absorbed the noise, the vibration, the toxic vapor. The mill owned you for 12 hours at a stretch, and the mills proliferated. Wherever geologists found gold-bearing quartz veins, mills appeared. Towns like Bodie, California, Virginia City, Nevada, Deadwood, South Dakota. Their character came from stamp mills as much as from the mines themselves. The mills were the economic heart, the constant thunder that marked prosperity. When a mill shut down, the town died. When a mill expanded, new workers flooded in. The California stamp mill became a distinct architectural type. Built on steep slopes to use gravity, they were multi-story structures with the ore entering at the top and the finished product, bars of bullion, leaving at the bottom. The standard mill at Bodie stood 6 stories tall. Ore cars dumped rock into bins on the upper floor. Rock breakers crushed the largest pieces. Automatic feeders delivered measured amounts to the stamp batteries on the next floor down. Below that, the pulp flowed across amalgamation plates. Further down, concentration tables separated remaining values. At the lowest level, the tailings, crushed rock with no recoverable gold, washed out into waste piles. The efficiency was remarkable. A single California stamp could crush 1.5 tons of ore per day, compared to 1 ton for the older Cornish design. A 40-stamp mill could therefore process 60 tons daily. Run continuously, that's 21,900 tons per year, and the mills did run continuously. The stamps hammered through the night. Shifts changed, but the machines kept working. Time was money. Idle equipment earned nothing. The economics reshaped everything. In the early gold rush, a miner worked for himself. If he found nothing, he starved, but if he struck it rich, the wealth was his. Under the industrial model, the workers earned steady wages but no share of the bonanza. The profits flowed to investors. When the Standard Consolidated Mining Company at Bodie paid out its dividends, the shareholders in San Francisco and New York collected the returns. The men who'd actually extracted the gold got their $4 per shift. The environmental costs mounted silently. Each ton of ore processed generated roughly 80 pounds of tailings, crushed rock that washed into streams and rivers. Over decades, millions of tons of rock flour smothered stream beds, killed fish populations, and changed watercourses. The mercury traveled with those tailings. Some bonded with gold and was recovered, but much flowed away in microscopic particles, entering the water table, accumulating in sediments. The Bodie district alone operated more than a dozen major stamp mills between 1877 and 1913. Virginia City's Comstock load supported even more. Multiply that across every gold district in California, Nevada, Colorado, Montana, South Dakota. The cumulative impact transformed western landscapes. The scars are still visible. Stamp mill ruins dot the mountains. Tailings piles, some stories high, resist vegetation more than a century later. Stream sediments still contain detectable mercury. By the early 1860s, another technological shift was underway. The earliest mills used simple amalgamation. Crush the ore, wash it over mercury-coated plates, collect the amalgam. But many ores were refractory. The gold was chemically bound to sulfur or other minerals and wouldn't amalgamate properly. Mills lost up to 95% of the gold in refractory ores. The solution was roasting. Mills added salt roasting furnaces that heated the ore with sodium chloride at high temperatures. This broke down the sulfides and freed the gold. Amalgamation efficiency jumped. Butte, Montana's silver mills all used salt roasting. The process worked, but it added cost and complexity. Then came chlorination in the 1880s and cyanidation in the 1890s, chemical processes that dissolved gold from crushed ore using chlorine gas or cyanide solutions. These methods recovered gold from tailings that had already passed through stamp mills once. Mills began reprocessing their own waste piles, extracting gold that earlier technology had missed. The Golden Gate Mill at Mercury, Utah, built in 1897, was the largest cyanide operation in America, processing 1,000 tons per day. By 1900, cyanidation was replacing stamp mills at many operations. The age of the stamp was ending, but it had lasted long enough to industrialize the gold rush completely. The human stories got lost in the tonnage numbers. Like the mill workers at Terraville, South Dakota, photographed in 1888 during cleanup at the Deadwood Terra Gold Stamp Mill. 15 men pose inside the mill, surrounded by machinery, standing ankle-deep in mercury-laden sludge. They're cleaning the amalgamation plates, scraping off days' worth of accumulated amalgam. Their clothes are soaked, their hands and forearms glisten with mercury. 3 of them are barefoot, standing directly in the toxic slurry. The photograph was taken by John C.H. Grable, who documented the Homestake Mining Company's operations. Those men made $3.50 per day. Cleanup duty paid an extra 50 cents because everyone knew it was the most dangerous work. Or consider the Joshua Hendy Stamp Mill near Placerville, California, built around 1900 as a community crusher. Small-scale miners who couldn't afford their own mills brought ore to Hendy's operation and paid a processing fee. The mill had 8 stamps and 2 batteries. When running at full capacity, the sound carried 1 mile to Placerville. Residents complained about the constant rumble shaking their houses. The mill owners ignored them. The mill ran anyway, day and night, processing ore for anyone willing to pay. It was rebuilt in the 1930s and continued operation into the 1940s. Today, it sits preserved, silent, a curiosity for tourists who can't imagine the sustained thunder it once generated. The peak came in the 1870s and 1880s. Nevada's Comstock lode alone operated more than 20 major stamp mills. Butte's silver boom was built on stamps. California's Mother Lode District maintained hundreds. At the peak, western mining regions contained more than 1,000 operating stamp mills, processing tens of thousands of tons of ore daily. The combined noise must have been extraordinary. A regional machine hum punctuated by steam whistles, ore car wheels, and the shouts of supervisors. Then the economics shifted. By the 1890s, stamps were becoming obsolete. Ball mills, rotating drums filled with steel balls that ground ore through tumbling action, proved more efficient for many ores. They were quieter, less maintenance-intensive, and could be scaled up more easily. Chemical processes like cyanidation worked better with finely ground ore, which ball mills produced more uniformly than stamps. By 1900, new mills were being built with ball crushers, not stamps. By the 1920s, many existing stamp mills had been retrofitted, the stamps pulled out and replaced with ball mills. A few stamp mills survived into the late 20th century. In remote regions where electricity was scarce and simplicity mattered, stamps kept working. In Colombia, artisanal miners still use stamp mills today, powered by electric motors. But in America, the stamp era ended by mid-century. The mills were dismantled, the heavy iron stamps sold for scrap. The buildings were abandoned. Weather and time did the rest. What the stamp mills really accomplished was the transformation of gold mining from romantic adventure into industrial labor. The mythology of the gold rush, the lone prospector with his pen, striking it rich through luck and grit that existed for maybe 2 years, from 1848 to 1850. After that, the story was corporate. Investors funded mills, engineers designed the processes, wage workers operated the machinery. The gold still came out of the mountains, but it flowed upward through a hierarchy, concentrating in fewer and fewer hands. Consider the numbers. In 1849, perhaps 80,000 individuals arrived in California, hoping to strike it rich. By 1852, maybe a few thousand had succeeded. The vast majority ended up working for wages, in the mills, in the mines, in the supply chains that fed the industry. Of the $2 billion in gold extracted from California between 1848 and 1900, the overwhelming majority went to mill owners and investors, not to the men who actually extracted the ore. The stamp mill was honest about what it was. It was a machine for converting mountains into money. It didn't pretend to offer dreams of independence. It offered wages, hard work, physical danger, and permanent hearing loss. Men took those jobs because $3 a day was better than starving. They stayed because mining towns were boom towns with few other employment options. They died young from the work, or they saved enough to get out and moved on to other ventures. The mills also transformed the mining West from temporary camps into permanent settlements. Placer mining was transient. When the stream bed played out, miners moved on. The camps dissolved. But stamp mills were fixed capital. Once you'd spent $100,000 building a mill, you weren't abandoning it. Mills meant long-term extraction, which meant stable towns, schools, churches, infrastructure. Virginia City, Deadwood, Bodie. They endured as long as their mills ran. When the mills shut down, the towns died, but some lingered as ghost towns. The mill buildings remain the most durable artifacts of the industrial gold rush. And the sound, always the sound. A generation of Western settlers grew up with stamp mills thundering in the background, the machine rhythm of industrial capitalism pounding away at the earth. Old-timers in mining towns could identify individual mills by their sound signature. They knew which mill had 20 stamps, which had 40, which one ran off rhythm because one stamp was sticking. The sound was prosperity. When the stamp stopped, everyone noticed. Silence in a mill town meant layoffs, closures, economic crisis. The mercury lingers too. In 2000, environmental testing in California's gold country found mercury contamination in sediments from nearly every stream that had supported stamp mills. The concentrations weren't high enough to ban fishing or drinking water use, but they were measurable. Typically 0.1 to 0.5 parts per million, occasionally higher near old mill sites. The mercury from the 1850s is still mobile in the environment, still bioaccumulating in fish, still cycling through ecosystems 170 years later. The stamp mills are gone. The consequences remain. The fundamental innovation of the stamp mill was that it made poverty grade ore profitable. Quartz veins containing half an ounce of gold per ton, or that no individual miner could work at a profit, became viable at industrial scale. The mills could process it cheap enough and fast enough that the margins worked. That capability extended the productive life of every gold district by decades. The easy surface gold lasted 2 years. The stamp mills kept working for 50. What killed the stamp mills wasn't a lack of ore. It was better technology. When cyanide heap leaching arrived in the 1970s, even the stamps became obsolete. Modern mining operations blast entire mountainsides, pile the ore into football field-sized heaps, and spray cyanide solution over it. The gold dissolves and percolates through the heap into collection ponds. No crushing needed, no stamps, no mills, no workers standing ankle-deep in mercury slurry. Just earth-moving equipment, chemistry, and time. The recovery rates are better. The labor costs are lower. The environmental damage is different but equally severe. But the stamp mills had their moment. They bridged the gap between hand tools and modern industrial mining. They transformed the American West from a prospector's frontier into a wage laborer's industrial zone. They concentrated wealth upward while democratizing exposure to industrial hazards downward. They were loud, filthy, dangerous, and profitable. They made fortunes for investors and widows of mill workers. They ate mountains and produced bullion. They were, for 50 years, the sound of American capitalism on the frontier. The Standard Mill at Bodie shut down in October 1913. By then, the ore coming from the mine couldn't support even 1/3 capacity operations. The company's management deemed it uneconomical. During 37 years of operation, that mill had processed approximately 720,000 tons of ore, producing more than $16 million in gold and silver, while paying out more than $5 million in dividends to shareholders. The mill workers who'd operated it for those 37 years left no equivalent record of their take. Wages don't aggregate into historical statistics the way dividends do. By 1920, only a few dozen stamp mills still operated in the entire American West. By 1950, fewer than 5. Today, you can visit preserved stamp mills at historic sites: Bodie, California, the Kennedy Mine near Jackson, the Idaho Springs Mill in Colorado. They sit silent, their stamps frozen mid-lift, the machinery rusting quietly. Tour guides explain how they worked. The visitors try to imagine the sound, the vibration, the relentless thunder. They can't. You had to live with it to understand what it was, the sound of the gold rush industrializing itself to death, one stamp drop at a time. The myth persists. The lone prospector in the stream with his pan, the flash of color in the gravel, the whoop of discovery. That's the gold rush in American imagination. The reality: a 750-pound iron stamp falling 90 times per minute onto pulverized quartz, driven by a steam engine, operated by a deaf man earning $3 a shift, producing gold that went to shareholders in San Francisco who'd never seen a mine. That was the gold rush. The stamps won. The prospectors became employees, the mountains became tailings, and the thunder echoed for 50 years before finally going silent, leaving only ruins and mercury in the sediment.